Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Cole Mitchell had built his empire from nothing. At 42, he owned 3 successful auto dealerships across Montana, a construction company, and a portfolio of rental properties that generated 7 figures annually. His hands bore the calluses of a man who'd started changing oil at 16 and worked his way up, buying his first dealership at 28 with money earned from 18-hour days and calculated risks. Cole's philosophy was simple: loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. He'd learned this lesson early when his business partner in his first venture had tried to steal clients behind his back. Cole hadn't just sued him. He'd systematically destroyed the man's reputation, ensuring he'd never work in the automotive industry again. It was a reputation that served him well. People knew Cole Mitchell's word was gold, but cross him once and you were finished. Bridget had entered his life 5 years ago at a charity gala. Stunning, with auburn hair and emerald eyes, she'd been working as an event coordinator for high-end functions. Cole had been immediately captivated by her sophistication and what seemed like genuine warmth. Their courtship had been swift. Bridget knew exactly what to say, how to laugh at his stories, how to make him feel like the most important man in the room. They'd married within 8 months, a lavish ceremony that had cost Cole nearly $200,000. Bridget had insisted on the best of everything, from the imported flowers to the designer dress that cost more than most people's cars. Cole hadn't minded. He'd finally found someone who appreciated the life he'd built. But Cole was a careful man, and careful men notice things. Over the past year, he'd seen the small signs. The way Bridget's phone was always face down, her sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run unusually long, the expensive lingerie he'd never seen her wear for him. He'd hired a private investigator 3 months ago, not out of jealousy, but out of the same methodical approach he applied to every aspect of his life. Troy Brennan was Bridget's yoga instructor, though Cole had discovered their sessions involved more flexibility training than what was advertised. 28 years old with the kind of sculpted physique that came from a lifetime of avoiding real work, Troy had a reputation around town as someone who specialized in bored, wealthy wives. He drove a leased BMW, lived in a trendy downtown loft his parents helped pay for, and considered himself an entrepreneur despite never having successfully launched any of his various business ventures. The private investigator's report had been thorough. Photos, timestamps, even audio recordings from their hotel encounters. Cole had studied every detail with the same precision he brought to contract negotiations. He'd known about the affair for 2 months, but had said nothing, watching, waiting, gathering information. Cole Mitchell didn't make moves until he understood every variable in the equation. On the morning of the accident, Cole had been driving to a meeting with a potential investor interested in expanding his dealership network into Wyoming. The roads were slick from an unexpected spring snowstorm, and Cole's attention had been divided between the treacherous driving conditions and a hands-free call with his attorney about a new acquisition. The semi-truck that ran the red light had been traveling nearly 50 miles per hour when it slammed into Cole's Mercedes. The impact had been catastrophic. His car had spun 3 times before slamming into a concrete barrier. The first responders had needed the jaws of life to extract him from the wreckage. Cole's last conscious memory was the sound of sirens and the metallic taste of blood in his mouth. Then there had been nothing but darkness and the distant sound of voices that seemed to come from underwater. Chapter 2. The Awakening. Consciousness returned to Cole Mitchell slowly, like surfacing from the bottom of a deep lake. But instead of the relief of taking that first breath, he found himself trapped, aware but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to open his eyes. The medical term was locked-in syndrome, though Cole wouldn't learn that until later. For now, he existed in a nightmare where his mind was crystal clear, but his body refused to obey. The first voice he recognized was Dr. Angela Rodriguez, his primary physician. She was explaining to someone that the traumatic brain injury had resulted in extensive swelling, and while the surgery had been successful in relieving the pressure, the extent of potential neurological damage wouldn't be known until the swelling completely subsided. The next 72 hours are critical, Dr. Rodriguez was saying. If there's no significant improvement in his responsiveness, we'll need to have some difficult conversations about long-term care options. Cole tried to scream, tried to move, tried to do anything to show them he could hear every word. Nothing. His body remained as still as stone while his mind raged against the prison of his own flesh. It was on the third day that he heard the conversation that changed everything. "The doctors say he won't wake up," came Bridget's voice, but there was something wrong with her tone. There was no grief, no desperation, just cold calculation. "Dr. Rodriguez says even if he does regain consciousness, there could be severe brain damage. He'd need round-the-clock care for the rest of his life." "That's not necessarily true," replied a voice Cole recognized as Howard Decker, Bridget's divorce attorney. Cole had known Bridget had consulted with Decker months ago about a potential separation, another detail from the private investigator's report. "The medical reports indicate there's still brain activity. There's a chance." "Howard," Bridget interrupted, her voice sharp with impatience. "Look around this room. Look at this equipment keeping him alive. Even if he wakes up, do you think Cole Mitchell, a man who built a business empire through sheer force of will, is going to want to live as a vegetable? We both know he wouldn't want this." Cole's mental state oscillated between fury and disbelief. She was discussing his life as if it were a business transaction. "The life insurance policy is substantial," Decker continued, "but only if natural death is determined. If you make the decision to withdraw life support, there could be complications with the payout." "What kind of complications?" "Insurance companies investigate large payouts, especially when life support is withdrawn. But if the doctors determine his condition is futile and recommend withdrawal, that's different. That's following medical advice." Cole heard the rustle of papers, then Decker's voice again. "I've spoken with Dr. Rodriguez. She's willing to reevaluate his prognosis if the family requests it. If she determines his condition is irreversible." "How long?" Bridget asked. "She could make that determination as early as tomorrow. The insurance policy is worth $4.2 million, plus the business assets, the properties, the investment portfolio. You'd be looking at somewhere north of $15 million total." There was a long pause. Cole strained with every fiber of his being to make some sign, any sign, that he could hear them. "And my situation with Troy?" Bridget's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Once you're widowed, there's no adultery to worry about. You could marry him tomorrow if you wanted, though I'd recommend waiting at least a year for appearances. Troy's business ventures would certainly benefit from some serious financial backing." Cole's rage was building to levels he'd never experienced. They were planning his murder, discussing it like a merger negotiation. "What about the prenup?" Bridget asked. "The prenuptial agreement becomes void upon death. Everything transfers to you as the surviving spouse. It's actually quite advantageous that you never filed for divorce. If you had, the prenup would have limited your settlement considerably." Cole heard footsteps approaching his bed, then felt the presence of someone standing close to him. "He looks so peaceful," Bridget said, and for a moment, Cole thought he heard a trace of genuine emotion in her voice. "I did love him once, you know." "I know," Decker replied. "But love doesn't pay the bills or secure your future. You're 34 years old, Bridget. You have a whole life ahead of you." "You're right." Bridget's voice was firm now, decision made. "Talk to Dr. Rodriguez. Tell her we want her honest assessment of his condition. If she thinks there's no hope for meaningful recovery." "I'll speak with her this afternoon," Decker assured her. Cole heard them gathering their things, preparing to leave. This was it. They were walking away to arrange his execution. But then something extraordinary happened. As Bridget leaned over to kiss his forehead, a gesture so hypocritical it made his rage spike to new heights, Cole felt something he hadn't felt since the accident. A tiny spark of sensation, like electricity jumping between two wires. His index finger, barely perceptibly, twitched. Neither Bridget nor Decker noticed. They were too busy discussing lunch plans as they headed for the door. But someone else saw it. Nurse Patricia Whitmore had been working in the ICU for 15 years. She'd seen enough patients in Cole's condition to know the difference between involuntary muscle spasms and purposeful movement. She'd been checking his fore when she'd seen his finger move, not the random jerking of damaged nerves, but a deliberate, controlled motion. She approached Cole's bedside and spoke quietly. "Mr. Mitchell, if you can hear me, try to move your finger again." Cole focused every ounce of his will on that one finger. "Move," he commanded it. "Move." The finger twitched again, more pronounced this time. Patricia's eyes widened. She grabbed Cole's hand gently. "Once for yes, twice for no. Can you hear me?" One twitch. "Are you in pain?" Two twitches. "Do you understand what's happening to you?" One twitch. Patricia squeezed his hand gently. I'm going to get Dr. Rodriguez right away. Don't worry, Mr. Mitchell. We're going to take very good care of you. As her footsteps faded down the hallway, Cole Mitchell began to plan his resurrection. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Dr. Rodriguez's re-examination was thorough and methodical. Cole had worked to strengthen his responses over the past day, managing to move not just his finger, but also showing pupil reactivity and slight facial muscle movement. By the time Bridget and Decker returned the following afternoon, expecting to discuss end-of-life decisions, Cole had progressed to being able to squeeze the doctor's hand and even flutter his eyelids on command. I have to say, this is quite remarkable, Dr. Rodriguez was explaining to a stunned Bridget. Yesterday, I was prepared to discuss palliative care options, but Mr. Mitchell is showing significant neurological improvement. The swelling has reduced considerably, and his cognitive responses are much stronger than we initially assessed. Cole watched through barely opened eyelids as Bridget's face cycled through surprise, disappointment, and finally a carefully constructed mask of relief. That's wonderful news, Bridget managed, though her voice lacked any genuine enthusiasm. When do you think he'll be fully conscious? It's hard to say exactly, but if this rate of improvement continues, I'd expect him to regain full consciousness within the next few days. There may still be some motor function issues to work through, but his cognitive function appears to be intact. Decker cleared his throat. Doctor, what about long-term prognosis? Will there be permanent disability? Again, it's too early to say definitively, but the signs are encouraging. Mr. Mitchell appears to be one of the fortunate few who makes a remarkable recovery from this type of injury. Cole noted the look that passed between Bridget and Decker, a silent communication that spoke volumes about their disappointment. Over the next 5 days, Cole carefully orchestrated his recovery. He knew he needed to appear genuinely incapacitated at first to avoid suspicion, but he also needed to improve enough to convince the medical staff he was out of immediate danger. He began responding to verbal commands, opening his eyes for longer periods, and even managing to whisper a few words. The private investigator, Danny Reeves, visited on the 4th day, ostensibly as a concerned friend, but actually to receive instructions. Cole had hired Danny through his attorney 2 years ago for various business intelligence needs, and their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship built on mutual respect and discretion. Bridget doesn't know about our working relationship, Cole whispered to Danny during a moment when they were alone. I need you to continue surveillance. I want to know every move she makes, every conversation she has. What do you want me to do about the divorce attorney? Danny asked quietly. Nothing yet. Let them think they're safe. I want to see how deep this goes. Danny nodded and squeezed Cole's shoulder. You need anything else, boss? My personal files. The ones in the safe at the house. Use the combination I gave you last year. Bring everything to my attorney's office. Consider it done. On the morning Cole was scheduled to be discharged, he received an unexpected visitor. Troy Brennan stood nervously in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable but trying to project concern. Hey, Cole, Troy said, his voice artificially bright. I heard you were awake. That's incredible, man. Everyone was so worried. Cole studied the younger man with cold calculation. Troy was wearing expensive clothes, a designer polo shirt and jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked exactly like what he was, a pretty boy who'd never worked a real day in his life. Troy, Cole said, his voice still weak from the intubation, but carrying an undertone that made Troy shift uncomfortably. That's thoughtful of you to visit. Yeah, well, you know, Bridget's been so worried. We all have been. The whole community's been talking about your accident. I'm sure they have. Cole let silence stretch between them, watching Troy fidget. So, when do you think you'll be back on your feet? Back to work and everything? Soon, Cole replied simply. Very soon. Troy nodded awkwardly and made his excuses to leave. Cole watched him go, mentally adding another name to his list. The divorce hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Cole had known about it for weeks, another detail from Danny's surveillance. Bridget had filed the papers while he was unconscious, clearly hedging her bets in case he survived. Her attorney had requested an expedited hearing, claiming irreconcilable differences and citing Cole's uncertain medical condition as grounds for immediate dissolution. Cole's own attorney, Margaret Foster, was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd helped Cole navigate complex business deals for over a decade. She'd also been secretly building Cole's case while he was in the hospital. The timing of the divorce filing is going to look suspicious, Margaret had warned him during one of their private consultations. Filing while you were unconscious doesn't show Bridget in a favorable light. That's the point, Cole had replied. I want the judge to see exactly who she is. On Tuesday morning, Cole walked into the courthouse under his own power. He was still weak, still moving carefully, but he was unmistakably alert and coherent. The shock on Bridget's face when she saw him was priceless, but it was Howard Decker's reaction that Cole found most satisfying. The attorney went pale, his confidence evaporating as he realized his client had just walked into a disaster. Cole had prepared carefully for this moment. In his briefcase was a folder containing audio recordings, photographs, financial records, and a detailed timeline of Bridget's activities while he'd been fighting for his life. But the most damning evidence was a recording Danny had made of Bridget and Decker's conversation in the hospital room, discussing Cole's futile condition and their plans for his life insurance money. As the hearing began, Cole stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. The courtroom fell silent as he approached the judge's bench. Your Honor, Cole said, his voice steady despite his recent ordeal. Before these proceedings continue, I believe the court should be aware of some additional evidence that has come to light regarding the circumstances of this divorce filing. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Patricia Hawkins. As she opened it and began reviewing the contents, Cole watched Decker's face transform from confusion to horror as he realized what was happening. The audio recording was the final blow. As Bridget's voice filled the courtroom discussing the withdrawal of Cole's life support and her excitement about inheriting his wealth, several people in the gallery gasped audibly. Bridget herself had gone completely white, her hands trembling as she gripped the table in front of her. When the recording ended, Judge Hawkins looked up with barely contained disgust. Mr. Decker, she said coldly, I believe you have some explaining to do. Howard Decker did the only thing he could do. He stood up, gathered his papers, and walked out of the courtroom without saying another word, effectively abandoning his client in the middle of a hearing. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs and shocked whispers, Cole Mitchell allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The game was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Architect of Destruction. 3 weeks after the divorce hearing, Cole Mitchell sat in his home office, a converted library with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Missouri River. The house felt different now, cleaner, somehow, without Bridget's presence contaminating it. The divorce had been finalized with unprecedented speed, Judge Hawkins ensuring that Bridget received exactly what the prenuptial agreement specified, $50,000 and her personal belongings. Cole's recovery had been remarkable, though he still experienced occasional headaches and fatigue. His doctors called it miraculous. Cole knew it was simply the product of his refusal to accept anything less than complete restoration of his faculties. He had work to do. The folder on his desk contained detailed profiles that Danny Reeves had compiled over the past month. Troy Brennan's financial situation was even more precarious than Cole had initially realized. The young man was leveraged to the breaking point. His loft was 3 months behind on rent, his BMW payments were in arrears, and he owed significant money to several local creditors. His yoga studio was failing, hemorrhaging money monthly despite the inflated fees he charged his wealthy clientele. More interesting was Troy's background. Daniel had discovered that Troy had been married briefly at 22 to a woman named Lisa Chun, a marriage that had ended when she discovered his affair with a married client. Lisa had moved to Seattle afterward and was now a successful software engineer at a major tech company. Bridget's situation was equally fascinating. With no meaningful job skills and her reputation in tatters following the divorce hearing, she'd moved in with Troy in his downtown loft. Cole's sources indicated the relationship was already showing strain. Troy had apparently expected Bridget to receive a substantial settlement, and her arrival with only her personal belongings and $50,000 had been a significant disappointment. But Cole's most interesting discovery concerned Howard Decker. The attorney's hasty retreat from the courthouse had been strategic. He'd known exactly what was in Cole's folder because he'd been planning something far more elaborate than simple life insurance fraud. Danny's investigation had revealed that Decker had been systematically stealing from his elderly clients for years, skimming money from estate settlements and hiding assets during probate proceedings. The attorney had planned to use Bridget's inheritance to cover his tracks and disappear, leaving his victims with depleted estates and no recourse. Cole leaned back in his leather chair, studying the city lights reflecting off the river. Most men would be satisfied with the divorce outcome. Bridget humiliated, Decker fled, Troy left with nothing. But Cole Mitchell was not most men. These people had planned his murder, had discussed it with the casual indifference of ordering lunch. They deserved something far more comprehensive than social embarrassment. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret Foster. Package delivered. Recipient confirmed receipt. Cole smiled. The first phase was beginning. The package was a detailed file Danny had compiled and Margaret had forwarded to the Montana State Bar Association, documenting Howard Decker's theft from elderly clients. The evidence was irrefutable: bank records, forged documents, falsified estate inventories. Decker's law license would be revoked within weeks, and criminal charges would follow shortly after. But Decker's legal troubles were just the opening move. Cole had purchased the mortgage on Decker's home through a shell company the week before. The attorney's expensive lifestyle had left him highly leveraged, and his mortgage was already in technical default due to some carefully worded accelerated payment clauses that Cole's lawyers had inserted during the purchase negotiation. The foreclosure notice would be served tomorrow morning. Cole's revenge against Decker wasn't motivated by anger, it was motivated by principle. The attorney had built his career on betraying the trust of vulnerable people, and Cole was simply ensuring that betrayal had consequences. Troy Brennan required a more creative approach. Cole had spent considerable time studying the younger man's psychology, and he'd identified Troy's primary weakness: his narcissism and desperate need for validation. Cole picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized. Prestige Athletic Management, answered a crisp female voice. This is Cole Mitchell. I'd like to speak with Jessica Romano about a potential business opportunity. Jessica Romano was a sports agent who specialized in representing fitness influencers and lifestyle coaches. More importantly, she was someone Cole had worked with 2 years ago when one of his dealerships had sponsored a local marathon. Jessica was ambitious, intelligent, and had no patience for people who wasted her time. Mr. Mitchell. Jessica's voice brightened when she came on the line. What a pleasant surprise. I heard about your accident. How are you feeling? Much better, thank you. Jessica, I'm calling because I'm considering investing in the fitness industry, and I need someone with your expertise to evaluate a potential opportunity. I'm listening. There's a local yoga instructor named Troy Brennan. I'm told he has significant potential as a fitness influencer, possibly even reality television material. I'd like you to meet with him and assess his marketability. Jessica was quiet for a moment. This is legitimate business interest? Not personal. Cole appreciated her directness. Completely legitimate. If he has genuine potential, I'm prepared to invest substantially in his career development. If he doesn't, I need to know that too. I can meet with him this week. What's your timeline? Soon as possible. And Jessica? I'd prefer if Mr. Brennan didn't know I'm the potential investor initially. I want your assessment to be based purely on his merits. Understood. I'll contact him today. Cole ended the call and opened his laptop. Troy's social media presence was extensive but unfocused. Thousands of followers but poor engagement, sporadic posting, and no clear brand identity. It was exactly what Cole had expected from someone who viewed social media as easy money rather than actual work. The plan for Troy was elegant in its simplicity. Jessica would dangle the possibility of major career advancement, national sponsorships, television opportunities, a pathway to genuine success. Troy would inevitably oversell himself, make promises he couldn't keep, and expose his fundamental lack of substance. But that was just the beginning. Cole had also arranged for several of Troy's creditors to receive anonymous tips about his improved circumstances. The yoga instructor would soon find himself dealing with aggressive collection efforts and legal demands just as he was trying to impress a major talent agent. The psychological pressure would be extraordinary. Cole's phone rang, interrupting his planning. The caller ID showed his sister Rachel's number. Cole. Rachel's voice was warm with relief. I just heard you were back home. Why didn't you call me? Rachel Mitchell Torres was 2 years younger than Cole and one of the few people in the world whose opinion he genuinely valued. She lived in Denver with her husband and 2 children, running a successful veterinary practice and somehow managing to maintain her optimism despite having grown up in the same harsh environment that had forged Cole's harder edges. I didn't want you to worry, Cole said, genuinely pleased to hear from her. Worry? Cole, you were in a coma. I would have dropped everything and come to Montana if I'd known how serious it was. I know you would have. That's exactly why I didn't call. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Mom always said you were too stubborn for your own good. Their mother had died when Cole was 25, a victim of pancreatic cancer that had taken her far too quickly. She'd been the one person who could always reach past Cole's defenses, the one who'd taught him that strength didn't have to mean hardness. How are you really doing? Rachel asked. And don't give me some bullshit about being fine. Cole considered the question seriously. Physically, he was recovering well. Mentally, he was sharper than ever. Emotionally, that was more complicated. I'm angry, he admitted. Angrier than I've ever been. At Bridget. Among others. Rachel sighed. Cole, I know she hurt you, but don't let this poison everything else. You've got so much to live for. Do I? The question surprised him with its honesty. Yes, you stubborn ass, you do. You've got family who loves you. You've built something meaningful with your business. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Cole looked out at the river, considering his sister's words. She was right, of course, but she didn't understand the depths of what Bridget and her conspirators had been willing to do. She didn't know about the hospital room conversation, about the casual way they discussed ending his life. I have to handle this my way, Rachel. I know. Just don't lose yourself in whatever you're planning, okay? The world needs more people like you, not fewer. After they hung up, Cole sat in silence for a long time. Rachel's words echoed in his mind, but they didn't change his resolve. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, some threats too serious to ignore. He opened his laptop again and began typing an email to a contact in Las Vegas, a private investigator who specialized in cases that required absolute discretion. Troy Brennan and Bridget Turner were about to discover that Cole Mitchell's resurrection was just the beginning of their nightmare. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. The meeting between Troy Brennan and Jessica Romano took place at an upscale coffee shop in downtown Billings on a Thursday morning. Cole observed from a corner table, hidden behind a newspaper and baseball cap, watching Troy's performance with clinical interest. Troy had dressed for the occasion in his most expensive outfit, designer jeans, a fitted polo shirt, and shoes that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. He'd clearly researched Jessica beforehand, dropping names of fitness celebrities and spouting industry terminology he'd obviously memorized the night before. Jessica, to her credit, maintained a professional demeanor while Troy painted himself as the next great fitness influencer. He spoke of his vision for revolutionizing yoga instruction, his plans for a nationwide studio franchise, and his confidence that he could build a massive social media following with the right backing. I've already got preliminary discussions going with several major brands, Troy lied smoothly. Nike's been expressing interest in a partnership, and I've got a meeting scheduled with a Netflix producer about a possible documentary series. Cole almost smiled. Troy's desperation was so obvious that even an amateur could have spotted it. The young man was promising the moon because he needed this opportunity to work out, needed it more than air. Jessica asked pointed questions about Troy's business plan, his current financial situation, and his experience with brand partnerships. Troy's answers became increasingly vague and overly ambitious. When she asked for references from previous business associates, he provided names that Cole knew didn't exist. After an hour of listening to Troy's fabrications, Jessica wrapped up the meeting with practiced professionalism. I'll need some time to review everything we've discussed, she told him. I'll be in touch within the week. As soon as Troy left, Jessica approached Cole's table. Well, Cole asked. Jessica shook her head. He's a disaster waiting to happen. No real business acumen, massively overestimating his marketability, and I'm pretty sure half of what he told me was complete fiction. But he's desperate enough to agree to almost anything. If you wanted to set someone up for failure, he'd be perfect. He'd sign any contract, make any promise, take any risk if he thought it might lead to success. Cole nodded. Send him a preliminary offer. Nothing committed, just enough to get his hopes up. Tell him you need to see more content creation from him, more social media engagement, and evidence of his claimed brand partnerships. That's cruel, Cole. You know he can't deliver any of that. Yes, Cole said simply. I know. That afternoon, Cole received a call from his contact in Las Vegas. I've got what you asked for, said Victor Petrov, his voice carrying a slight Russian accent despite having lived in America for 20 years. Victor was a former private investigator who now worked exclusively for clients who needed information that wasn't available through conventional channels. The woman, Bridget Turner, she's been busier than you might expect, Victor continued. She's been reaching out to several of her ex-husband's business contacts, trying to gather information about his assets and business operations. Cole's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of information? Bank accounts, business partnerships, real estate holdings. She's been telling people she's concerned about estate planning issues, claiming you've been experiencing memory problems since the accident. The audacity was breathtaking. Bridget was still trying to find a way to access his wealth, even after the divorce. There's more, Victor said. She's been in contact with a man named Carl Morrison. He runs a small investment firm here in Vegas, specializes in high-risk ventures for wealthy clients. From what I can determine, she's been discussing some kind of business proposition with him. Cole made notes as Victor spoke. Carl Morrison was a name that would require investigation. And the yoga instructor, Troy Brennan? Interesting story there. He's been gambling online, poker mostly. Lost about $15,000 in the past month, money he clearly didn't have. His credit cards are maxed out, and he's been borrowing money from friends with promises of big payoffs coming soon. Cole felt a cold satisfaction. Troy's desperation was even deeper than he'd realized. One more thing, Victor added. Brennan's been asking around about high-interest short-term loans. The kind of loans that come with severe consequences for non-payment. That evening, Cole called Margaret Foster to his office. She arrived carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd been working on something unpleasant. Howard Decker's situation is developing as expected, Margaret reported. The state bar is moving forward with disbarment proceedings, and the district attorney is preparing criminal charges. The man's career is over. And his personal finances? The foreclosure is proceeding. He's hired an attorney to fight it, but the paperwork is ironclad. He'll be homeless within 60 days. Cole nodded. What about the elderly clients he stole from? That's where it gets interesting. My contacts in the DA's office tell me Decker's been trying to make deals, offering information about other lawyers and what he claims are larger fraud schemes in exchange for leniency. Is there any truth to his claims? Margaret shrugged. Probably not. He's desperate and saying whatever he thinks might help him. But he's also been making some wild accusations about you. Cole raised an eyebrow. Such as, he's claiming you orchestrated his downfall as revenge for the divorce proceedings. He's telling anyone who will listen that you've been planning this for months, that you have connections to organized crime, and that you're systematically destroying everyone who crossed you. Cole almost laughed. How much of that is true? Well, you did orchestrate his downfall. But organized crime connections? The man's delusional. Let him talk, Cole said. No one's going to believe the desperate ramblings of a disbarred lawyer facing prison time. Margaret opened her folder and pulled out several documents. I've got the contracts ready for the Troy Brennan situation. Everything's structured through shell companies, so your involvement won't be traceable. The contracts were masterpieces of legal manipulation. On the surface, they appeared to offer Troy everything he wanted, a substantial investment in his yoga business, marketing support, and a pathway to fitness industry success. But buried in the fine print were clauses that would give Cole complete control over Troy's business operations, personal finances, and even his social media presence. More importantly, the contracts included penalty clauses for non-performance that would leave Troy personally liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages if he failed to meet impossible performance metrics. He'll sign these? Margaret asked. Without question. Jessica is going to present them as a preliminary agreement from a major investor who prefers to remain anonymous initially. Troy's desperate enough to agree to anything. Cole's phone buzzed with a text message from Danny Reeves. Package delivered to apartment 4B. Cole smiled. The package was a series of collection notices and legal demands that would be waiting for Troy when he returned home. By tomorrow morning, the young man would be facing immediate legal action from 3 different creditors, all demanding payment within 10 days. The timing was perfect. Troy would receive Jessica's preliminary contract offer just as his financial world was collapsing around him. The psychological pressure would make him even more reckless, more willing to sign anything that promised salvation. What about Bridget? Margaret asked. Cole's expression darkened. Bridget requires special attention. She's not going to be satisfied with financial ruin or professional destruction. She's the type who'll keep coming back, keep looking for angles, keep trying to find a way to hurt me. What are you thinking? Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river. When he spoke, his voice was cold and final. I'm thinking Bridget Turner is about to discover that some mistakes have permanent consequences. Chapter 6. The Perfect Storm. Troy Brennan's world collapsed on a Tuesday morning in spectacular fashion. He'd returned from his meeting with Jessica Romano feeling more optimistic than he had in months, already mentally spending the money from his soon-to-be signed contract. But his euphoria evaporated the moment he saw the collection notices taped to his apartment door. 3 separate law firms were demanding immediate payment for debts totaling nearly $40,000. His yoga studio's equipment lease company was threatening repossession. His landlord was demanding 3 months of back rent or immediate eviction. And somehow, his online poker account had been frozen pending an investigation into irregular activity. Troy's hands shook as he read each notice. His phone had been buzzing with calls from unknown numbers all morning: collection agents, attorneys, creditors. The timing couldn't have been worse, just as he was trying to project success and stability to secure the investment opportunity. His phone rang again. This time it was Jessica Romano. Troy. Jessica's voice was professionally friendly. I've got good news. My client is interested in moving forward with a preliminary agreement. Troy felt a surge of relief so intense it made him dizzy. That's fantastic. When can we make this official? I can email you the contracts this afternoon. The terms are quite generous, but my client does want to move quickly. He's concerned about market timing and wants everything signed within 48 hours. Absolutely. Whatever he needs. After hanging up, Troy immediately called Bridget. The investment's coming through, he told her, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. I'll have access to serious money within the week. Bridget's response was cooler than he'd expected. How much money? The initial investment is $200,000, but there's potential for much more if I meet the performance targets. Troy. Bridget's voice carried an edge of suspicion. Who is this investor? You've been deliberately vague about the details. Troy hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know who the investor was, and he'd been afraid to ask too many questions in case it spooked them away. It's complicated. High net worth individuals often prefer anonymity for their investments. But Jessica Romano is legitimate. I checked her out. This better not be some kind of scam, Troy. I gave up everything for you. For us. The conversation ended awkwardly, and Troy found himself staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had he started looking so desperate? When had the confidence he'd once worn so easily become this brittle facade? His laptop chimed with an incoming email from Jessica. The contract was 30 pages of dense legal language, but Troy's eyes went straight to the numbers. $200,000 initial investment, with performance bonuses that could bring the total to over $1 million within 2 years. He scrolled through the document quickly, his excitement building with each page. There were requirements, social media benchmarks, revenue targets, exclusive partnership agreements, but nothing that seemed unreasonable for someone with his potential. Troy signed the contracts that evening without consulting an attorney, electronically submitting them at 11:47 p.m. along with bank account information and personal financial documentation. He went to sleep that night believing his problems were solved. Meanwhile, across town, Cole Mitchell was reviewing very different contracts in his home office. Victor Petrov had delivered exactly what Cole had requested: detailed financial records, personal information, and a comprehensive dossier on Carl Morrison, the Las Vegas investment advisor who'd been courting Bridget. Morrison's operation was exactly what Cole had suspected: a sophisticated scam targeting recently divorced women with substantial settlement money. Morrison would offer exclusive investment opportunities with guaranteed returns, collect substantial upfront fees and deposits, then disappear with the money while his victims were left with worthless paperwork and no recourse. The scheme was clever because it targeted women who were emotionally vulnerable and unfamiliar with financial complexities. Most never reported the fraud out of embarrassment, and those who did found that Morrison had structured his operations across multiple states and jurisdictions, making prosecution nearly impossible. Bridget had been corresponding with Morrison for 3 weeks, discussing investment opportunities that could triple her divorce settlement within 6 months. She'd already wired him $10,000 as a good faith deposit for an exclusive real estate investment package. Cole had to admire the irony. Bridget, who'd planned to steal his wealth through life insurance fraud, was now being systematically robbed by someone running an almost identical scam. But Cole wasn't content to simply watch Bridget lose money to Morrison's scheme. He had something far more comprehensive in mind. His phone rang at midnight. The caller ID showed Victor's number. Morrison took the bait. Victor reported without preamble. He's agreed to meet with your representative in Las Vegas next week to discuss the larger investment opportunity. Cole smiled. The larger investment opportunity was a fabrication designed to draw Morrison into a trap. Cole had created a fictional wealthy widow who was seeking to invest several $1,000,000 through Morrison's firm. The bait was irresistible, exactly the kind of score Morrison lived for. The meeting set for Friday afternoon at the Bellagio, Victor continued. Morrison's already fantasizing about the commission fees. Perfect. You have everything else in place. The FBI contact is standing by. Agent Patricia Wells specializes in interstate financial fraud, and she's been tracking Morrison for months. Once we provide evidence of his activities, she'll have enough for federal charges. Cole's plan for Morrison was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than simply exposing him to his victims, Cole was going to hand him to federal law enforcement with enough evidence to guarantee a lengthy prison sentence. But the Morrison situation was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Cole's real focus remained on Bridget herself. Danny Reeves had been conducting surveillance on Bridget for 6 weeks, documenting her activities, recording her conversations, and mapping her daily routines. The picture that had emerged was of a woman spiraling into desperation and paranoia. Bridget had been living with Troy in his cramped apartment since the divorce, but their relationship was deteriorating rapidly. Troy's financial crisis had made him increasingly unstable, and Bridget's own money problems were mounting. She'd burned bridges with most of her former friends during the marriage, and her job prospects were limited by her lack of meaningful work experience. More significantly, Bridget had been asking questions about Cole's business operations, trying to determine if there were assets she might still be able to claim. She'd consulted with 3 different attorneys about the possibility of challenging the divorce settlement, each time being told that her case was hopeless. Cole's investigation had also revealed something else about Bridget, something that changed the entire nature of his plans for her. She was pregnant. The timing suggested Troy was the father, though Danny's surveillance indicated Bridget hadn't told Troy about the pregnancy yet. She'd been to 3 different medical appointments over the past 2 weeks, and her behavior suggested she was wrestling with a difficult decision. Cole stared at this information for a long time, feeling something shift inside him. A pregnant woman changed the equation, introduced variables he hadn't anticipated. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Thinking of you tonight. Hope you're taking care of yourself." Cole looked out at the river, then at the files spread across his desk. For the first time since leaving the hospital, he found himself questioning the path he'd chosen. But then he remembered Bridget's voice in the hospital room, cold and calculating as she discussed ending his life. He remembered the casual way she talked about inheriting his wealth, the complete absence of grief or concern for his suffering. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, pregnant or not. Cole picked up his phone and typed a response to Victor. Proceed as planned. All targets, all timelines. The storm he'd been building was about to break, and when it did, there would be no shelter for anyone who'd stood against him. Chapter 7. The Reckoning begins. The trap closed on Carl Morrison with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Agent Patricia Wells had positioned her team throughout the Bellagio's conference facilities, recording equipment tested and ready, while Victor Petrov played the role of a wealthy widow's financial advisor seeking to invest inherited funds through Morrison's exclusive programs. Morrison arrived precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained detailed investment proposals guaranteed to separate gullible victims from their money. He'd spent the previous evening researching his fictional client, fantasizing about the substantial fees he'd collect from what he believed would be a multi-million-dollar score. The meeting lasted exactly 37 minutes. In that time, Morrison presented Victor with detailed proposals for 5 different investment schemes, each designed to extract maximum money while providing zero actual value. He discussed offshore accounts, tax avoidance strategies, and exclusive opportunities that were only available to select clients. Most importantly, he accepted a $50,000 wire transfer as a security deposit to secure the fictional widow's position in his most exclusive investment fund. Agent Wells had everything she needed. Morrison was arrested as he left the Bellagio, the wire transfer serving as irrefutable evidence of interstate fraud. The FBI had been building cases against his operation for months, but Cole's manufactured evidence provided the final pieces needed for federal prosecution. Morrison would spend the next 15 years in federal prison. Back in Montana, Troy Brennan was discovering that his investment contract was not the salvation he'd imagined. The performance metrics buried in the fine print were impossible to achieve: social media engagement targets that would require supernatural growth, revenue benchmarks that were mathematically unattainable for a single yoga studio, and marketing requirements that demanded skills Troy simply didn't possess. Worse, the contract's penalty clauses meant that failure to meet these impossible standards would leave Troy personally liable for damages exceeding $300,000. The contract he'd signed so eagerly was actually a sophisticated debt trap that would ensure his financial destruction regardless of his efforts. Jessica Romano called Troy on Thursday morning with the news he'd been dreading. "The investor is disappointed with your initial performance metrics," she told him, her voice professionally neutral. "Your social media engagement is down 18% from last month, and your studio's revenue figures don't match the projections you provided." Troy felt his stomach drop. "But it's only been 3 days since I signed the contract. These things take time to develop. My client is very metrics-driven, Troy. He's concerned that you may have oversold your capabilities." "I can fix this," Troy said desperately. "I just need a little more time, maybe some guidance on the marketing requirements. I'll relay your concerns to my client, but I have to warn you, he's considering triggering the non-performance clauses. That would mean immediate repayment of all invested funds plus penalties." After hanging up, Troy sat in his empty yoga studio, staring at the equipment lease notices that had been accumulating on his desk. 3 students had canceled their memberships in the past week. His online classes were attracting minimal attendance, and his attempts to boost his social media presence were falling flat. Even worse, Bridget had been increasingly distant and irritable. Their conversations had devolved into arguments about money, responsibility, and their uncertain future together. Troy suspected she was having second thoughts about their relationship, especially as his financial situation became more obviously desperate. That evening, Bridget dropped a bombshell that shattered what remained of Troy's composure. "I'm pregnant," she announced without preamble, her voice flat and emotionless. Troy stared at her, his mind struggling to process this additional complication. Are you sure? I've known for 2 weeks. I wanted to wait until your investment situation was settled before telling you." 2 weeks. Troy's voice rose. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this," Bridget snapped. "With panic and selfishness instead of support and maturity." Troy began pacing their small living room, his hands running through his hair as he tried to calculate how a baby would affect their already precarious financial situation. "Bridget, this changes everything. The expenses alone, and with my current situation. Your current situation is that you signed a contract you clearly didn't understand with an investor you know nothing about. Our situation is that I'm pregnant, and we need to make some serious decisions about our future." Troy stopped pacing and looked at her with something approaching desperation. "What kind of decisions?" Bridget was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city lights below. When she spoke, her voice carried a coldness that reminded Troy uncomfortably of the way she'd sometimes talked about her ex-husband. "I'm considering all of my options," she said finally. That night, while Troy lay awake staring at the ceiling and contemplating the ruins of his life, Cole Mitchell was putting the final pieces of his plan into motion. He'd received confirmation that Morrison's arrest had been successful, which meant Bridget's investment with the Las Vegas scammer was now frozen as evidence in a federal case. More importantly, Cole had received the surveillance report detailing Bridget's pregnancy announcement to Troy. Danny Reeves had installed sophisticated listening devices in Troy's apartment weeks earlier, providing Cole with real-time intelligence about his target's emotional states and decision-making processes. Cole's response to Bridget's pregnancy had surprised even him. Where he'd expected to feel satisfaction at this additional complication in her life, He instead felt something more complex. Not sympathy, exactly, but a recognition that the situation had evolved beyond his original parameters. He called Margaret Foster at home, something he rarely did, but which the circumstances seemed to warrant. "We need to adjust the timeline," he told her without preamble. "What's changed?" Cole explained about Bridget's pregnancy and the shifting dynamics between his targets. Margaret listened without interruption, then was quiet for several moments. "Cole," she said finally, "I have to ask, how far are you willing to take this? Because what you're describing sounds like you're having second thoughts." Cole considered the question seriously. Was he having second thoughts? The pregnancy certainly complicated his feelings about Bridget, but it didn't change what she'd done, didn't alter the fundamental betrayal she'd committed. "I'm not having second thoughts about consequences," he said eventually. "But I am refining my approach to ensure the consequences are appropriately targeted." Meaning Bridget and Troy need to face the full weight of their choices, but any collateral damage needs to be minimized. Margaret was quiet again. "And how exactly do you plan to accomplish that?" Cole looked out at the river, watching the moonlight dance across the water. His plan had always been about more than simple revenge. It had been about ensuring that people who betrayed trust faced meaningful consequences for their actions. "By giving them exactly what they deserve," he said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less." The next morning, Cole made 2 phone calls that would determine the final shape of his revenge. The first was to Jessica Romano, providing her with specific instructions about Troy's contract modification. The second was to a contact in Denver who specialized in a very particular kind of problem solving. By the end of the week, both Troy Brennan and Bridget Turner would understand the true cost of their betrayal. And Cole Mitchell would finally be able to close this chapter of his life and move forward. Chapter 8. The Final Moves. Dr. Amanda Cross was one of the most respected addiction specialists in the Rocky Mountain region, known for her work with high-functioning individuals whose substance abuse problems had begun to impact their personal and professional lives. Her clinic in Denver maintained absolute confidentiality and had successfully treated everyone from Fortune 500 executives to professional athletes. Cole had first learned about Dr. Cross through his sister Rachel, who'd recommended her when one of Cole's employees had developed a drinking problem several years earlier. Now Cole was recommending her services to Troy Brennan, though Troy didn't know the recommendation was coming from Cole. The anonymous tip that reached Troy suggested that his gambling addiction and increasingly erratic behavior were symptoms of deeper psychological issues that required professional intervention. The tip included Dr. Cross's contact information and a note indicating that someone concerned about Troy's welfare had already arranged for his treatment to be fully funded. Troy, drowning in financial obligations and facing the imminent collapse of his relationship with Bridget, seized on this lifeline with desperate gratitude. He called Dr. Cross's office that same afternoon. "Someone's arranged for my treatment?" Troy asked during his initial phone consultation. "Yes," Dr. Cross confirmed. The arrangements were made through an intermediary who preferred to remain anonymous. "Your benefactor indicated that you've been struggling with gambling addiction and related financial pressures." Troy felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. "Do you know who it is?" "I'd like to thank them. I'm afraid confidentiality requirements prevent me from sharing any identifying information. But I can tell you that this person clearly cares about your well-being and wants to see you succeed." What Troy didn't know was that his anonymous benefactor had also provided Dr. Cross with extensive documentation of his gambling activities, his relationship history, and his pattern of making impulsive decisions that harmed both himself and others. Dr. Cross was nothing if not thorough. By the time Troy arrived for his first appointment, she had a comprehensive understanding of his psychological profile and the underlying issues that had led to his current crisis. The treatment program she designed for Troy was intensive and transformative. It required him to confront not just his gambling addiction, but his narcissistic tendencies, his pattern of using others for financial gain, and his fundamental inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Most importantly, the program required Troy to make amends to people he'd harmed, starting with a detailed confession about his affair with Bridget and the role he'd played in her marriage's destruction. Meanwhile, Bridget was dealing with her own set of revelations. The FBI had contacted her about Carl Morrison's arrest, informing her that the money she'd invested with him was gone and that she would be required to testify in his federal trial. Agent Patricia Wells had been gentle but direct in explaining Bridget's situation. Mr. Morrison has victimized dozens of women in situations similar to yours, Wells explained during their interview. We understand this is difficult, but your testimony will be crucial in ensuring he receives the maximum sentence. What about my money? Bridget asked. Unfortunately, the funds have been dissipated through various offshore accounts. Restitution is possible, but it typically takes years and recovers only a fraction of the original investment. Bridget left the FBI field office feeling hollow and defeated. Between Morrison's theft and Troy's increasingly unstable behavior, her financial situation was becoming desperate. The $50,000 from her divorce settlement was nearly gone, and her job prospects remained limited. But her most pressing concern was the pregnancy. At 34 and facing an uncertain future, the decision about whether to continue the pregnancy was becoming more complex with each passing day. She'd scheduled an appointment with a counselor recommended by her doctor, someone who specialized in helping women navigate difficult pregnancy decisions. What Bridget didn't know was that the counselor, Dr. Sarah Williams, had received detailed background information about Bridget's recent history, including her role in the plan to withdraw Cole's life support. Dr. Williams was ethically bound to maintain neutrality, but she was also committed to ensuring her clients made fully informed decisions. During their sessions, she guided Bridget through a comprehensive examination of her motivations, her relationship patterns, and her capacity to provide stable care for a child. The process was more emotionally challenging than Bridget had anticipated. For the first time in years, she was forced to confront the reality of her actions and their consequences. Cole observed these developments from his office overlooking the river, receiving regular updates from Danny Reeves and his other sources. The machine he'd set in motion was working exactly as designed, but he found himself feeling less satisfaction than he'd expected. His phone rang with a call from Victor Petrov in Las Vegas. Morrison's been arraigned on federal charges, Victor reported. His bail was set at $2 million, which his family can't afford. He'll be in custody until trial. What about his other victims? The FBI's identified 43 women across 7 states. Total losses are estimated at over $8 million. Morrison's looking at 25 to 30 years if convicted on all counts. Cole nodded, making notes. Morrison's destruction was complete and permanent, exactly as it should be for someone who'd built his life on exploiting vulnerable people. There's something else, Victor continued. Morrison's been trying to make deals with federal prosecutors, claiming he has information about other financial crimes. What kind of information? He's desperate, so he's throwing out wild accusations. He's claiming the anonymous tip that led to his arrest was part of a larger conspiracy, that someone's been systematically targeting him and his business associates. Cole almost smiled. Is anyone taking these claims seriously? Not particularly. Morrison's credibility is non-existent, and he can't provide any evidence to support his theories. The prosecutors see it as the desperate ramblings of a man facing serious prison time. That evening, Cole called Margaret Foster to review the final phase of his plan. Troy's entered addiction treatment, Margaret reported. Dr. Cross indicates he's making significant progress in understanding his psychological patterns, but the process of making amends is going to be emotionally devastating for him. And Bridget, still working with the pregnancy counselor. Dr. Williams says she's beginning to confront some difficult truths about her behavior and motivations. Cole was quiet for a moment. Margaret, do you think I've gone too far? Margaret considered the question carefully. You've ensured that people who committed serious wrongs face serious consequences. Morrison was destroying lives and would have continued if you hadn't stopped him. Troy was a parasite who used women for financial gain. Bridget, she paused. Bridget planned your murder, Margaret finished. She stood in your hospital room and discussed ending your life like she was choosing what to have for lunch. Whatever she's going through now, it's nothing compared to what she was willing to do to you. Cole knew Margaret was right, but something had shifted in his perspective over the past few weeks. The pregnancy had complicated his feelings, but more than that, he'd realized that his revenge was consuming more of his life than his targets deserved. I want to end this, he said finally. End it how? Cole looked out at the river, watching the lights from passing boats reflect off the water. By giving them one final choice. A chance to demonstrate whether they've learned anything from what they've experienced. And if they haven't learned anything, Then they'll face the full consequences of every choice they've made. Cole's final move would be the most challenging yet, requiring him to reveal his hand and trust that justice would be served by forces beyond his control. But first, he had one more phone call to make. Chapter 9, Resurrection. 6 months after walking into that courthouse divorce hearing, Cole Mitchell sat in his office drafting the most important letter he'd ever written. Outside his window, the Missouri River reflected the first hints of autumn color from the cottonwoods along its banks. Inside, Cole felt something he hadn't experienced since waking up in the hospital, a sense of completion. The letter was addressed to Bridget Turner, though she was living under a different name now in a small apartment across town. Cole knew she'd changed her name legally, trying to escape the reputation that had followed her since the divorce hearing. What she didn't know was that Cole had been quietly monitoring her progress through the pregnancy counseling and her subsequent decisions. Bridget, by now you've realized that the events of the past 6 months were not coincidental. Carl Morrison's arrest, Troy's treatment program, the various financial and legal pressures you've both faced, all of it was orchestrated as consequences for the conversation you had in my hospital room while I lay unconscious. I heard every word. I heard you discuss withdrawing my life support with the casual indifference of someone choosing a restaurant for dinner. I heard you calculate the insurance payout and plan your future with my money before my body was even cold. What you and Troy attempted was not just betrayal. It was premeditated murder motivated by greed. Cole paused in his writing, remembering the cold sound of Bridget's voice that day. Even now, months later, the memory could trigger a rage so intense it made his hands shake. However, he continued, I've also observed your responses to the consequences you've faced. You've engaged seriously with counseling, you've made difficult decisions about your pregnancy with apparent thoughtfulness, and you've begun to rebuild your life through legitimate work rather than schemes and manipulation. This was true. Danny's surveillance had shown Bridget working 2 part-time jobs, living within her means, and attending regular therapy sessions. She decided to continue her pregnancy and was preparing for single motherhood with what appeared to be genuine commitment. Troy's journey through addiction treatment has been more transformative than I anticipated. Dr. Cross reports that he's confronted his psychological patterns honestly and has made genuine efforts to change his behavior. His amends process has been thorough and sincere. Troy had indeed surprised everyone with his progress. The confession he'd written about his affair with Bridget was detailed and showed genuine remorse. He'd also reached out to other women he'd financially exploited over the years, offering what restitution he could manage and acknowledging the harm he'd caused. This letter serves as my final action in this matter. I'm providing you both with a choice. Option 1. Continue on your current paths. Accept that your past actions have consequences. Continue your therapy and personal growth, and build legitimate lives based on honest work and authentic relationships. If you choose this path, you'll never hear from me again. Option 2. Return to the patterns of behavior that led to this situation. Attempt new schemes, manipulate other people, or try to seek revenge against me for the consequences you've faced. If you choose this path, I want you to understand that what you've experienced over the past 6 months is nothing compared to what I'm capable of when someone threatens me or mine. Cole set down his pen and walked to the window. The letter felt both like an ending and a beginning. He'd proven to himself that he could dismantle anyone who crossed him, but he'd also discovered that revenge, no matter how precisely executed, couldn't undo betrayal or restore broken trust. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Rachel's number. Hey, big brother. Rachel's voice was warm with affection. I just wanted to check in. How are you really doing? Cole considered the question seriously. Physically, he'd made a complete recovery from the accident. Financially, his businesses were thriving. Personally, he felt different, changed in ways that went beyond the physical trauma. I'm better, he said finally. Different, but better. Different how? I've learned some things about myself. Some good, some less good. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Cole, I know you've been dealing with more than just the accident and divorce. I can hear it in your voice. Cole wasn't surprised that Rachel had sensed the deeper currents in his life. She'd always been perceptive about people's emotional states. I discovered that people I trusted were willing to do terrible things for money, he said carefully. I had to decide how to respond to that. And what did you decide? Cole looked at the letter on his desk, then at the river flowing past his window. I decided that justice matters, but so does mercy, and that the best revenge is sometimes just living well while your enemies destroy themselves. The final phase of Cole's plan had been the most complex. Rather than simply crushing Troy and Bridget completely, he'd created circumstances that forced them to confront their own choices and their consequences. The addiction treatment, the pregnancy counseling, the financial pressures, all of it was designed to give them opportunities to change or to reveal their true natures definitively. Troy had surprised him by choosing genuine change. The young man was still struggling financially and would be for years, but he'd enrolled in a community college business program and was working to build a legitimate career. More importantly, he'd severed all contact with married women and was focusing on developing actual skills rather than relying on his looks and charm. Bridget's path had been more complicated. The pregnancy had forced her to consider someone other than herself for the first time in years. Her therapy sessions had been difficult but productive, and she was slowly building the foundation for a stable life. But Cole knew that people could change their behavior without changing their fundamental nature. The letter was his way of drawing a clear line. Continue on the path of genuine change, or face destruction so complete it would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider betraying him. He returned to his desk and finished the letter. I'm enclosing a cashier's check for $50,000. Consider it a baby gift or seed money for a legitimate business, or simply a gesture of goodwill towards someone trying to build a better life. What you do with it will tell me everything I need to know about who you've become. Choose wisely. This is the only choice you'll get. Cole Mitchell. Cole sealed the letter with the check inside, then called Danny Reeves to arrange delivery. Within an hour, the letter would be in Bridget's hands, and his involvement in her life would be finished one way or another. That evening, Cole stood on his deck overlooking the river, a glass of bourbon in his hand and a sense of closure settling over him like a comfortable blanket. The past 6 months had tested him in ways he'd never anticipated, revealing capacities for both calculation and mercy that had surprised him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thank you for the chance. I won't waste it. B. Cole smiled and deleted the message. Some stories ended with dramatic confrontations and explosive revelations. Others ended with quiet acknowledgments and the promise of different choices. A week later, Cole received a call from Dr. Cross in Denver. I wanted to thank you for the referral, she said. Troy Brennan has been one of our most committed patients. He's asked me to pass along a message. What message? He says he understands now what he put you through, and he's grateful for the opportunity to become someone better. He also says he hopes someday to earn the right to apologize to you in person. Cole considered this. And what do you think about his chances? For genuine change? Better than most. The combination of addiction treatment and the amends process has forced him to confront some difficult truths about himself. Whether he maintains his commitment to change long-term, that's ultimately up to him. Cole thanked Dr. Cross and hung up. Troy's message was more than he'd expected, but it felt genuine rather than manipulative. 3 months later, Cole received a birth announcement in the mail. A baby girl, healthy and beautiful according to the photo. No return address, but the postmark was local. Bridget had kept the child and apparently wanted Cole to know. Cole studied the photo for a long time, thinking about cycles of behavior and opportunities for redemption. The baby was innocent of her parents' choices, deserving of a chance to grow up free from the shadows of past betrayals. He made one final phone call to Margaret Foster. I want to establish a trust fund, he told her. Education expenses for Bridget Turner's daughter. Full college tuition and expenses, but only if certain academic and behavioral standards are maintained. How much are you thinking? Whatever it takes. The child shouldn't pay for her parents' mistakes. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You know this means you'll have ongoing involvement in their lives, even if it's indirect. Cole looked out at the river, watching the current carry leaves and debris downstream toward the ocean. Some things were swept away by time and distance. Others remained, transformed but recognizable. Sometimes the best revenge is ensuring that the next generation has better choices, he said finally. As Cole Mitchell hung up the phone and turned back to the business of building his life, he reflected on a truth he'd learned through months of careful planning and precise execution. Real power wasn't the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to know when destruction served justice and when mercy served a higher purpose. The finger that had twitched in a hospital room had saved more than just his life. It had revealed the difference between revenge and justice, between punishment and redemption. And in the end, that distinction had made all the difference.